woke up looking for the broccoli. High key, keep a horn on me, that could my seat.
First murder at America's most secure prison.
A day in soundproof 7 by 12 foot cells designed to prevent them from making any meaningful contact with the outside world or with each other. It's where the most violent and dangerous inmates in the country are housed, and because of this, the staff takes extreme measures to ensure the prisoners' safety, including constant video surveillance, especially when they gather outside for recreation time. And on this particular day, despite everything being seemingly routine that morning, the guards noticed something odd. There in the back corner of the yard, an area surrounded by 12-foot-high concrete walls topped with razor wire, was an inmate, lying bloodied and motionless. But how could a prisoner in the most tightly controlled prison in the U.S. get murdered in broad daylight? And even when it turned out that that murder had been caught on camera, why did it take nearly 10 years to solve? This is what we're going to find out. Jose Guadian, a guard at ADX Florence, arrived at his job watching security monitors just after 7 a.m. After his partner showed up, they ensured all the monitors were recording and then began scanning for anything suspicious. You see, rec time is where the inmates go about a lot of their illicit business. This is because inmates at ADX Florence spend almost the entire day locked up in their cells, which are built from reinforced concrete and equipped with sliding doors operated remotely by the guards. Every cell has its own narrow slit of a window, angled so that the sky is the only thing visible, preventing inmates from establishing any kind of connection to the outside world. Meals are delivered through small slots and showers are automated within the cells, all to minimize human contact and reduce the risk of violent incidents.
I remember that.
This meant
Yeah,
that rec time is one of their few opportunities to break the rules. Exchanging drugs, passing notes, and handing off weapons were all things Jose and his partner would be watching for. Just before 8 o'clock, the first groups of inmates began walking into the rec yard. As prisoners start doing push-ups, burpees, and other calisthenic exercises, Jose and his partner scanned the hands and the feet of the inmates, looking to see if anyone passed or dropped anything. The pair continued scanning until at 8:21 a.m., they spotted an inmate lying motionless in the far corner of the rec yard. After confirming with his partner that what they were looking at was real, the pair phoned the head of prison control, Paul Middleton. Paul immediately called a security alert. As soon as he did, every door in the prison slammed shut, except for a set that ran directly to the rec yard. With sirens blaring all around him, Paul wheeled a giant cart full of non-lethal weapons outside of his office. Every officer that ran by could grab a pepperball gun, a
Are those, you said non-lethal? Bro, I see a shotgun, an AR-15. I see a, bro, they're lethal. They're lethal, bro. I don't know
beanbag
what you're
rifle, a
talking about.
baton, anything they needed to face the inmates. As guards in the facility responded and made their way into the prison yard, they didn't immediately rush in. Instead, they
Obviously,
formed a
that
perimeter
wasn't
around the yard. This is because prison
accurate
rules
weapons
dictated
displayed.
in these
That was
scenarios,
wrong.
guards must maintain a 3-to-1 balance of power over the inmates. The prisoners at ADX Florence are so dangerous, and with so many of them in the yard, they couldn't risk being overwhelmed. So instead, the officers began to call them one by one to walk backward toward the prison walls, where individual prisoners could then be handcuffed and brought back into their cells. Only once enough inmates had been removed like this would the ratio of guards to prisoners be high enough that officers could clear the rec yard. Medical staff, though, did immediately make their way to the downed inmate, and what they found shocked everyone. There, lying in a pool of his own blood, was an inmate who was so beaten that when medical staff tried to identify him, they couldn't, since his face was completely covered in bruises. When they attempted to identify brain functioning by shining a light in his pupils, they were unable to do so since his eyes were swollen shut. Medical staff later commented that his injuries were akin to what they had seen from people who had jumped from a nearby Royal Gorge Bridge, which was a 1,000-foot fall. Though medical staff could not get a pulse, they began CPR and they called for an ambulance. The prisoner was declared deceased at the hospital, but it is likely he died while still at the prison. As the prisoner was being transported into the hospital, though, correctional officers were busy bringing inmates to their cells, and that's when they got their first clue. Guards noticed that one of the prisoners, Richard Chuco Santiago, had blood all over his shoes. When they realized the significance of this, they came back to his cell and seized his clothing. But when they got there, Santiago was busy dunking his clothes and shoes into his prison toilet. Guards ordered him to stop, but he ignored them and started washing them faster.
Oh my
When
God.
threatened with a forceful extraction to stop him from
I keep on forgetting how comfortable you have to get with being right next to, sleeping next to, like most likely, you know what I'm saying, having physical reaction with the toilet across the room from you, bro, on a daily basis because you're living there in a cell. I can't even do it. You know what I'm saying? I'd just be cooked. Especially
From
when you got a
destroying potential
roommate
evidence,
too.
Santiago finally
That
allowed the
make-
officers to handcuff him,
That makes it
and they
even
entered
worse.
his cell. As this was happening, prison officials were also reviewing the video recordings to see if the cameras had picked up anything. In ADX Florence, nearly every inch of the facility is under constant surveillance, with the video feeds running 24/7. During the video review, the officers finally discovered the identity of the victim. His name was Manuel Tati Torres, and he was a known leader of the Mexican Mafia. The tape showed Torres doing some toe touches in the back corner of the yard when two men came into the frame. The first was Santiago, the man who had been caught cleaning his clothes in his cell, and the second was another inmate named Sylvester Chicale Rivera. As Santiago approached Torres, Torres extended his hand as if to shake Santiago's, when all of a sudden Santiago cocked back his fist and punched Torres in the face.
Who you think you is, Auntie Aro? Whatever your name is, man. Santiago. Bro, cocking your fist up at like.
First blow
I'm
knocked him to the
envisioning the
ground
scenario
and
right
just
now.
out of view of the camera. But Santiago and Rivera could still be seen punching, kicking, and stomping Torres for a full 6 minutes. The killers were so brazen and nonchalant about the attack that during the assault, Santiago even took a quick breather to grab a drink of water before going back in on Torres. The next day, officers went to Rivera's cell to detain him. When officers arrived, he was visibly shaking but cooperative. As he was being led away, he asked if the deputies were mad about what he did. When they didn't respond, he asked about what had happened in the rec yard yesterday, wanting to know if it was truly the first time a murder had happened at ADX Florence. "What I did," he said. "I heard it made the news." Not wanting to taint any additional statements, the corrections officers advised Rivera to stop talking and wait for the investigators to come. But who exactly were these people, how did they know each other, and why did they want to murder one of them? All three men were affiliated with the Mexican Mafia, which was born out of the cesspit that was the California Juvenile Detention Program in the 1950s. And the whole idea behind the gang was to unite Mexican-American gang members under one common banner while in jail. The gang recruited heavily and based their operation on the Italian mafias that were prominent in the American Northeast at the time. The organization had strict rules. Members had to follow all orders from made members no matter what, up to and including murder. Backing down from a fight, snitching, or trying to leave the gang were all grounds for immediate execution. And soon the gang's hyperfixation on extreme violence earned it a fearsome reputation. So much so that the California prison authorities tried to clamp down on the organization by dispersing the gang to other parts of the state. But that ended up having the opposite effect. Like a cancer, the Mexican Mafia, which was now spread out, only grew more powerful. Over the years, as members made parole, they established sects throughout California, where they continued their drug trafficking, prostitution, extortion, and murder-for-hire rackets on the outside. The Mexican Mafia, now known as La M, or the M in Spanish, became an extremely powerful gang, both inside and outside the California prison system. Its core membership consisted of around 750 made members who controlled up to 50,000 associates and foot soldiers at any given time, who all had aspirations to become a full-fledged member. And the only way to do that was to commit a murder in the name of the gang. So where did these three men fall in this organization? Manuel Torres was a senior leader in the organization, first joining the gang in the 1960s. He quickly became a powerful figure in Southern California. His main racket was an extortion business that charged drug dealers and drug users a tax to buy and use drugs in his territory. He would then take a percentage of the cut and send it back to incarcerated members to help them live a more comfortable life on the inside. In 1997, Torres was one of several dozen Mexican Mafia members arrested in a giant operation. At first, Torres was sent away to do his time at Lompoc, a federal institution several hundred miles away from Los Angeles. However, once at Lompoc, Torres united all the Hispanic gangs on the yard under the banner of La M and began terrorizing the other prisoners. After running out of options to limit his power, state prison officials decided the only way to beat Torres was to ship him off to ADX Florence, where he could hopefully be controlled. As for Santiago, he was a fully made member of the Mexican Mafia and, like Torres, had also been imprisoned at Lompoc. A career criminal, Santiago earned his way into the Mexican Mafia by killing a fellow inmate in 1989, which got him a life sentence. Continuing to be unruly, he was eventually shipped off to ADX Florence in 2000, and he and Torres arrived there around the same time. Then there was Sylvester Rivera. Rivera was a longtime associate of the Mexican Mafia a career bank robber who brought in huge sums of cash for the group, but had not been made a full member yet. After getting caught, Rivera continued to break prison rules in every institution he was at, from using drugs to making contraband wine, fighting, and trying to escape.
That boy
Rivera
was
was
a
a problem
menace.
child no matter where he went. After dealing with him for years, it was decided ADX Florence was the only place for him, and he arrived in March 2005. But even though all of these men were bad guys, it was still a homicide. The truth needed to be found out. But because the institution was federal property, the FBI would handle the investigation. And the person in charge of finding out the truth was a man who will only be known as John. In order to keep his identity a secret, John has only revealed a few details about who he was. He would later tell a reporter who investigated the case his first name, that he grew up in a very Christian southern town, and he came from a large police family. All other details had to be limited to protect himself and his family, and the reporter would soon learn why this was the case. After being assigned the case, John first went to the facility to speak to the inmates who were in the yard that day. As he made his way to the prison complex, an immense feeling of dread came over him. The complex was situated in an absolutely beautiful part of Colorado, surrounded by picturesque mountains, but the facility itself was ominous, cold, and eerily quiet. When John arrived, he asked the prison officials if they had an interview room he could use to speak to the inmates. They told him yes, they did, but no, he couldn't use it. You see, one of the worst things a prisoner can do is talk to a cop. The others see it as a betrayal, and so even the suggestion that someone had spoken to him about the murder and potentially snitched in any capacity would be enough to get them killed. John would have to come up with another way to speak with the inmates without letting the others know. To protect their confidentiality, John set up a makeshift office in a secluded part of the prison. Correction officers would take away one prisoner at a time with a made-up reason for their removal. This could be under the pretext of a doctor's appointment, a meeting with an attorney, a dental appointment, or some other mundane reason. But despite this, it didn't take long for the prisoners to figure out what was going on. One time, after several prisoners had been brought in under the guise of a dental appointment, other prisoners remarked that they didn't realize they had so many issues with their teeth. And just because they weren't talking to John in the official interrogation room, that didn't mean they would be any more cooperative. After the guards sat down the potential witnesses, many would unleash a flurry of profanities as soon as John flashed his FBI badge. Others remained even more defiant, and they refused to say a single word at all, and they would stare at John in silence until he gave up. In fact, during John's visit to ADX Florence, not a single inmate made any statement whatsoever about what happened that day, nor anything about Torres, Santiago, or Rivera. It seemed as if the entire population of several hundred inmates had either been sworn to secrecy about what happened, or they had been threatened. Either way, John realized he wasn't going to get anything out of them, and he was forced to leave ADX Florence empty-handed. But John wouldn't give up that easily. Not willing to be defeated, he teamed up with the assistant U.S. attorney, Bob Midens, a career prosecutor who had made a name for himself in the Denver office as someone who could take on even the most complex legal cases and win. Together, he and John devised a new strategy to try to figure out what had happened, but they would need expert help to do this. The experts they chose were members of the FBI field office in Los Angeles. Here, the Intelligence Bureau had several resident experts on La M, and they knew practically all the players. When the duo met with the FBI officials in Los Angeles, they were stunned at the amount of information they had gathered on the gang. Inside the FBI office, there was a literal library of information documenting nearly every crime and every member of the group that they knew of. Not having much time, they received permission to copy most of the documents there and bring them back to Colorado for review. But that wasn't the only thing the FBI gave them there. In addition to the documents, they handed over a list of former Mexican mafia members who had turned state witness for various trials. These former gangsters had signed their own death warrants because of this, and they were all put into the Federal Witness Protection Program. As part of the deal to help them, the FBI field office in LA gave John and Bob a list of Mexican mafia defectors. However, they did not give them information on what they had done in their previous lives, nor did they promise their cooperation. But this was still their best shot at understanding La M and why Torres might have been marked for death. With that, John and Bob went on a countrywide tour, interviewing ex-gangsters to figure out the truth. Though many were unwilling to involve themselves, they did speak to enough people to learn the following secrets about the gang. In La M, once you're marked for death, it doesn't matter if the decision was made months, years, or even decades ago, it was still a valid order. Members marked for death never knew what was coming, and because Mexican mafia members were spread throughout prisons in the U.S., it could take a long time for word to pass from member to member confirming the hit. Once enough members had voted for death, word could travel via messengers throughout various prisons or on the outside. Because of this, it could literally take years before a member is released to relay a message on the outside. This is because, unlike other gangs, which sometimes have documents showing written rules or orders, the Mexican Mafia keeps no records. All confidential information is locked inside one place only, the members' minds, and it is only passed by...
Yo, this is like some movie stuff, bro. I never think the games like evolved like this to this extent, bro. You know what I'm saying? What is the intellectual ability that's
word of mouth.
being
So
displayed?
what
right?
had the defectors had to say about this case in particular? What cardinal sin of La M had he broken? According to them, the reason why Torres had been marked for death was because back in the early 90s, as he was taking over his extortion business, he had killed a fellow member to have it all for himself. It took several years for other members to find out Torres was behind the murder, and by the time they did, he had already been arrested in 1997 and then shipped off to ADX Florence in 2000. So, who was Santiago? It's been claimed that he was what's known as a torpedo. Torpedoes were hitmen specifically designated to carry out assassinations of marked men inside the prison system. So, for Santiago to be sent from Lompoc to ADX Florence around the same time as Torres shows that it is very possible his murder was planned years in advance.
That's
But how
crazy.
did Rivera fit into all of this?
Really was
Because
that El
Rivera
Man.
was not yet a fully made member, he needed to commit a murder to finish his gang initiation. In addition to this, Santiago would have to receive a verbal order from outside ADX Florence to confirm the kill order and then execute it with Rivera. Based on their witnesses, John and Ryan speculated that Rivera was a messenger who brought the order to Santiago, since within 3 weeks of Rivera arriving at ADX Florence, Torres was dead. Armed with this expert testimony and the treasure trove of documents provided by the LA field office, not to mention the video of the murder itself, the pair brought a 2-count murder indictment against Santiago and Rivera in 2010. But that is where the real hard work started. Because these prisoners were already serving time in the most brutal prison in America, the U.S. attorneys wanted to send a message to dissuade other inmates from committing extreme acts of violence. But how would they convince other prisoners who had nothing else to lose? After a year of investigation, the Justice Department's Capital Crimes Unit, or Death Squad as it's known, came back with their findings. The United States would seek the death penalty against Santiago and Rivera to dissuade similar crimes in the future. But there was just one problem. Rivera was a Mexican citizen. Under the Vienna Convention, Rivera had to be apprised of his right to counsel immediately upon apprehension for the crime, which corrections officers did not do when they took him from his cell. And while this might not have seemed like a big deal, to the nation of Mexico it was, and soon the Mexican ambassador actually got involved. He wrote letters to the Attorney General and the Secretary of State about Rivera's case. Because Mexico had abolished the death penalty, trying to seek it against a Mexican citizen was a very hot-button political issue. So under political pressure, Bob announced that he would not be seeking the death penalty against Rivera, but would continue to do so against Santiago. But then disaster struck. After working on the case for years, Bob suffered a sudden heart attack while skiing with his wife and died. John took the death of someone who had now become his close friend very hard. Because of Bob's passing, John recused himself from the case. In Bob's stead, U.S. Attorney M.J. Mendez took over. But who could help? Who had the knowledge of the case needed to finish it and get the final convictions? Sometimes you don't have to look very far at all, since it turned out that John had married a fellow FBI agent. After watching her husband handle the case for years, she had become intimately familiar with it, as she had been a sounding board for her husband. With John no longer having the heart to continue after Bob's passing, his wife picked up where he left off and worked with Mendez to prepare the Rivera case for trial. But there was still a big problem. Due to the secretive nature of the Mexican Mafia and the government's inability to bring their confidential informants to court, the theory that John and Bob had developed about a hit that was years in the making, while sound, was no good in court. Due to the lack of hard evidence to prove the conspiracy theory, the prosecution wanted to rely on what they could prove, namely the videotape showing the attack. As the trial kicked off, there were some extreme security measures taken to protect all of those involved from reprisals from this shadowy quasi-terrorist organization. Each of the jurors was impaneled in secret. Their faces were not shown in court, and a 4-digit number was used for their identification. As for Rivera, he was shackled to a bucket filled with concrete and flanked by numerous U.S. Marshals ready to tackle him should he try to escape or do anything out of line. But just before the trial kicked off, Rivera's defense team brought up a surprise piece of evidence: an eyewitness. Over the past 10 years, the government had not been able to procure a single statement from anyone in the yard that day. But now, all of a sudden, before the trial, the defense team had found a prisoner who was suddenly willing to testify about the attack. There was a chance he could unravel the whole case against Rivera. So, how did the government claim the murder went down? According to them, Rivera had been sitting in his cell waiting on his turn to go out into the rec yard that morning. Due to an administrative error, the guards did not take him out at the correct time, and so Rivera had flagged down a passing guard to take him out to the rec yard. Meanwhile, video footage had captured Santiago walking up to a window and talking into it. Further investigation by John using drawings of the prison had proven that Santiago had been talking into Rivera's cell while he waited to get taken outside. Once outside, the duo began warming up for their workout in the same corner as Torres, as seen in the video footage. Santiago approached Torres and cold-cocked him, and then the two spent the next 6 minutes beating him to death. But this was a vastly different story from what the new defense witness testified about. Another full-fledged Mexican mafia member named Arcadio Perez came forward as the new witness. According to Perez, this is what happened. Perez said that Torres had apparently passed him a note stating that Rivera was disrespectful and had to be dealt with, and that because Rivera was not a made member, he could kill him with impunity. Perez later testified that these were not empty threats. According to him, Torres ordered Perez that at the rec yard that morning, they were going to attack and kill Rivera. At the signal of "let's go," they would pounce on him and beat him to death right there in the yard. For his part, Perez didn't want to do it. He said that he and Rivera were friends and he honestly liked the guy. However, Torres was a ranking member in the gang. Disobeying his order would mean a death sentence for himself. But was there any truth to what he was saying? Well, maybe. According to prison records, Torres had utilized an inmate intercom system to talk to the guards that morning. Prisoners used this system since the guards didn't stay on the rec yard when they were out there. From guard testimony, Torres had been asking about where Rivera was. Because of this, it did seem odd that Torres was asking for Rivera, and the fact lends some credence to what Perez was saying. But why didn't he follow through? Perez stated that when he saw Santiago approach Torres and start fighting him, he backed off because now it was a dispute between two made members and he was not going to get himself involved. As a result of this, he stayed on the sidelines. But what did Rivera have to say about all of this? Much to everyone's surprise, Rivera took the stand in his own defense, and what he said had a ring of truth to it. According to Rivera, Torres didn't like him because he was close friends with several members Torres didn't like, likely because they were associated with the man Torres had murdered back in the early 90s. Because of this, Torres threatened Rivera's life on numerous occasions. Now, part of that does make some sense. Torres probably wanted everyone to forget about what he had done in the 90s. With several other ranking Mexican mafia members imprisoned at ADX Florence, the fact that Rivera probably knew what Torres did scared him about what would happen if Rivera began running his mouth. For his part, Rivera denied that he was a messenger who had helped organize the murder. In fact, he said he was the one defending himself. Rivera stated that Santiago took the wannabe gangster under his wing and vowed to protect him. On the day of the murder, he said that Torres had threatened his life again and wanted to fight him. However, Santiago took the initiative by using the ruse to talk to Torres, but instead started fighting him. Rivera then jumped in to help finish off Torres. In Rivera's mind, he wanted the world to believe that if he had not helped kill Torres that day, then he would be the one who ended up dead. There were two sides to the story, and so with that, the jury went off to deliberate and decide on Rivera's fate. As the two sides eagerly awaited a verdict, they returned a question to the court. The jury asked if it was permissible to consider a lesser charge than first-degree murder. This was a good sign for both camps. For the prosecutors, it meant that they believed Rivera had committed a criminal act, and for the defense, it meant a lesser charge. However, before the trial started, Rivera, against the advice of his attorneys, stated he did not want any other charge other than first-degree murder considered. This was because of his advanced age. Already in his late 50s by now, even a conviction of second-degree murder would be a de facto life sentence for him. With just a few more years left on his armed robbery convictions, Rivera was hoping to be a free man soon to enjoy his retirement.
See, look,
Because
my brain
of that,
cells
the
ain't
judge ordered that the
comprehending
jury
every
could
single
only
thing
consider
that
a
they
first-degree
saying,
murder charge and nothing else.
Sorry,
Soon
ADHD.
after that, the verdict came back. As the aged gangster rose to hear his fate, he had a slight smile on his face as he anticipated an acquittal. But that smile soon faded when he heard the verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. It had taken years, but they finally got their man when the jury delivered a guilty verdict. And for a bit of poetic justice, the verdict came almost exactly 10 years to the day after the murder had taken place. When the jury members were questioned later as to how they reached their decision, they said that if the case were really about self-defense, why would Rivera and Santiago keep kicking and stomping Torres even after he was down? After the first few minutes, their point would have been made to back off. Everything afterward was unnecessary. Several months after Rivera's conviction, he learned of his fate. For the crime of first-degree murder, he would spend the rest of his natural life in prison. Of course, Rivera maintained his innocence at the time and continues to maintain his innocence to this day, claiming it was a self-defense.
Shut your ass up. All right, we're gonna move on to the next thing. You know what I'm saying? My brain cells is like it's not working that much today. But y'all know we gonna continue to grind. We gotta keep on grinding, bro. No matter what. Hold on. Now I was gonna see something. What was I gonna see? I was gonna see or react to one when heroes go. Okay. Let us see. I need a little soundboard thing so I can just start playing elevator music. That'll be fire. What the fuck? I ain't see that Family Guy, but hold on.